Welcome to the deep dive. We know you're here because you love to get to the bottom of things, to truly understand. And we're here to help you do that without, spending weeks in the library. It's all about those aha moments for us. And judging by the source material you sent in, I think we've got some exciting aha moments ahead. This time, we're diving into the history and origins of the Amazigh people and their language.
Yeah, you've given us a really fascinating mix of sources here. Some are all about linguistics, breaking down the words themselves, and then we have these historical accounts, some spanning centuries. So in this deep dive, we're aiming for two things. First, we want to unpack the word Amazigh. What does it mean, and where might those meanings come from?
Like, what's the story behind the word itself?
Exactly. And second, we're going to look at the historical theories that link the Berbers, or the Amazigh, to other ancient peoples. The Canaanites, in particular, play a big role in those theories.
It's like a puzzle with pieces from all over the place. We've got linguistics, history, even some biblical connections coming up. It's going to be a great deep dive. Now, we've got to start with the word Amazigh. Can we actually learn something just from that word itself?
We can. The traditional understanding, which you might already know, is that Amazigh means free man. And that's a powerful statement right there.
Mhm.
But your sources give us some other really intriguing possibilities, and these come from linguistic analysis, so keep in mind that we're dealing with theories here, trying to find the deeper roots of the word.
Right, like exploring all the possible branches on the family tree of a word. Okay, so one theory that caught my eye connects Amazigh to the root ZGH.
Right, the GH, it's a sound. It's like a guttural sound that's written as
You have
GH.
to sort of like clear your throat while you say R. It's a tricky sound.
It is. So this root ZGH shows up in words like Zegwa, Azeggwagh, and Azwa, and they both mean red. So according to this theory, Amazigh could mean red man.
Red man.
Yeah, and your source even suggests this might relate to how people saw each other back then. It says red man might have been used to describe people with lighter skin, in contrast to people with darker skin. It's a theory that makes you think about those early forms of identity, how people categorize themselves and others based on how they look.
It really does. It's like a window into their worldview.
So fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got red man, but then there's another theory, right?
There is. And this one also uses that same root, ZGH. But this time it connects to words like ze or za. Those mean to be like fiery or bold, brave even.
I'm sensing a theme here.
Right. And we still have words today like sat or zact. And those mean bravery or, how do you say it, temerity, boldness, I guess. So this theory suggests Amazigh could mean brave or courageous. And that's a pretty powerful meaning, too. It suggests a value system, maybe even a societal ideal.
Definitely, like bravery is at the core of who they are. And then we have a third theory. We do. This one takes a slightly different approach. It looks at the root, ZDGH. That means to inhabit. And in linguistics, sounds often influence other sounds. So the theory is that the D sound in Amzda, which means inhabitant, kind of got absorbed by the Z sound. It became more Z-like, and that led to Amazigh. So this interpretation ties the name to the land, to a sense of belonging.
As the people of this land. So we've got three really different possibilities here. Red man, brave man, inhabitant. It's incredible how much one word can hold. It's like a history lesson in itself. But now let's shift gears a bit. We've got these fascinating historical theories about the origins of the Amazigh, and the Canaanites seem to pop up a lot. Where does that connection even come from?
So your sources take us all the way back to St. Augustine, who lived in North Africa around the 4th and 5th centuries AD. He noticed something interesting. He observed that peasants near Hippo, when asked who they were, would answer in Punic. That's the language they spoke, that they were Chinani. And Augustine, he made a connection. He said that Chinani, the way it was pronounced locally, sounded like Chananai. And that's the word for Canaanites in the Bible.
So right from the beginning, it's a linguistic link. But your source does point out that this connection might not be, rock solid on a linguistic level.
That's right. But it's still fascinating that this idea was already around back then. Maybe it was influenced by the growing importance of biblical stories, both within the church and among educated people.
Right, like fitting the Berbers into the biblical narrative. But Augustine wasn't the first one to try to connect the Berbers to other groups, right?
Exactly. Your sources mention even earlier theories. Sallust, drawing on what King Hempsel wrote, suggested that the people of western Libya were related to the Medes, the Persians, and even the Armenians. And around the same time, Pliny the Elder said that the Farusi, who lived in southern Morocco, came from Persia. So there seems to have been this tendency to link the Berbers to established groups from the ancient world.
It's like they wanted to place the Berbers on the map of history as they knew it. And the Canaanite connection, it seems to have grown stronger over time.
It did.
Sure.
You included Procope, who lived in the 6th century AD, in your sources, and he actually spends a good chunk of his book, Vandalic Wars, telling this elaborate story that connects the Berbers to Moses and Joshua. He describes the conquest of Canaan and how it led to the migration of different groups, like the Gergesites and the Jebusites. He says they fled to Egypt and then eventually made their way to Libya.
Wow, it's like a whole epic journey. So according to Procope, these groups brought their language with them too. They were speaking Phoenician in North Africa.
That's what he claims. He even mentions finding inscriptions in Phoenicians at a place called Tigisi. He gives this kind of fantastical translation. He says the inscription reads something like, "We are the people who fled before the face of Jesus, actually Joshua the brigand, son of Nave."
Jesus the brigand. That's a pretty strong image.
It is, but your sources point out that this translation is probably inaccurate. Maybe Procope's informants couldn't actually read Punic, or maybe the inscription wasn't even in Punic at all. But what's interesting is that this story, even if it's not entirely accurate, shows how much people believed in this Canaanite origin for at least some of the Berbers.
Like, the story was becoming more and more fixed, even if the details were a bit fuzzy. And this idea kept going even centuries later, right? You've got El-Bekri in the 10th century, and then the famous Ibn Khaldun in the 14th.
You're absolutely right. Ibn Khaldun is very clear about it. He says that the Berbers are descendants of Canaan. And Canaan, according to the Bible, was the son of Ham, who was the son of Noah. Ibn Khaldun even names a specific ancestor, Amazigh, and he connects them to the Gergesites and the Philistines. He even says that their ancient kings had the title Goliath, or Jelaut, as he knew it. This really shows how deeply rooted this origin story became.
It's like the biblical narrative and the history of the Berbers were totally intertwined in people's minds. And it's not just outsiders saying this, is it? Your sources mention that Moroccan Jews would refer to Berber tribes using names like Canaanite, Philistine, Jebusite, and Amorite. So this idea was shared by different communities.
Yeah, that's a really important point. It shows how widespread this belief was. And it was probably reinforced by how people read and interpreted religious texts for centuries. But here's the question that your sources raise. Does this connection to a biblical origin automatically mean that the Berbers saw themselves as descendants of the Phoenicians?
Right, because the Phoenicians spoke a language very similar to the Canaanites. It was called Punic in North Africa.
Exactly. And this is where things get really interesting. Because if this Canaanite identity was so central, so important to them, wouldn't we expect to see it more in their own writing?
You mean in Punic inscriptions?
Yeah. But that's the thing. The term Canaanite is almost completely absent from those inscriptions.
So they're not really calling themselves Canaanites?
Not in their own writing, it seems. There's one possible example that your sources mentioned. It's on a stela from El Hofra, and it has the letters KN apostrophe N, which might mean Canaanite. But even that interpretation is based heavily on Augustine's text about the Janani, and it involves someone from an unknown island. It's kind of a circular argument.
Right. It's like they're using Augustine to prove Augustine.
Exactly. So how is it that regular people near Hippo, people who probably couldn't even read, would call themselves Canaanites if that wasn't a common term back in Punic times? It seems more likely, as your sources suggest, that Chinani was just a local name, a tribal name maybe, that just happened to sound like Chanane to Augustine. And that's what made him make that connection.
So the Canaanite origin theory, it's been around for a long time, but it might not be as strong as it seems. It relies on interpretations of the Bible more than on what the people themselves were saying. Now, you also sent us some fascinating material on the etymology of the word Phoenician. What can we learn from that?
The Greek word for Phoenician is phoenix. That's spelled Phoanix, and it's pronounced something like phoenix. And that word, it has a bunch of different meanings. It means the mythical bird, of course, but it also means the color red, the place and people of Phoenicia, and even the date palm. And where it comes from, well, that's debated. Some think it comes from Egyptian, others think it comes from Semitic languages, maybe even Phoenician itself, and some even think it comes from Greek, where it would mean blood red.
Blood red. That's a strong connection, especially when you think about what the Phoenicians were famous for.
The purple dye.
Exactly. They made this incredibly valuable purple dye from murex shellfish, and the Mediterranean coast was full of those shellfish. That dye was a major industry for them, and it was, pretty reddish purple.
Right. And they were known for their dye all over the ancient world. So the connection to red makes a lot of sense. But remember, Phoenix can also refer to the date palm, and Phoenicia was also known for its dates.
So we've got these historical accounts trying to link the Berbers to the Canaanites. But when we look at the word Phoenician itself, it highlights these other connections. Red, from the dye, and dates, a major product. It's a different kind of connection, more about trade and material goods than about direct ancestry.
It is, and it really shows how complex it is to trace these historical origins. We can approach it through language, through historical narratives, and through material evidence and trade. It's like looking at the problem from all these different angles.
It's like we've been on this incredible journey. We started with the word Amazigh itself, and we saw all these different meanings it could have. Red man, brave man, inhabitant. Each one gives us a glimpse into how the people who use that word might have seen themselves. It was their own story, their own identity. But then we have these external narratives, like the Canaanite connection, trying to define them from the outside.
And we really dug into those theories, starting with St. Augustine, then Procope, El-Bekri, Ibn Khaldun. They all contributed to this idea that the Berbers came from Canaan. But what we've learned is that this might be more about how outsiders tried to understand the Berbers than about the Berbers' own understanding of themselves.
Right. And the fact that the Punics themselves didn't really use the term Canaanite to describe themselves has some doubt on that whole theory. Like, we have these two perspectives, the internal richness of the word Amasi with all its possible meanings, and then these external attempts to fit the Berbers into a bigger historical framework.
It's a fascinating contrast, and it really makes you think, what does it mean that the Amazigh people still use this word today, even with all these different interpretations and historical claims swirling around them? It says something about their self-perception, about how they see themselves in the context of history.
It's a powerful statement. It's like saying, this is who we are, regardless of what others might say. It really speaks to the power of names and origin stories, how they shape identity and how they're passed down through generations.
It does, and we've only just scratched the surface here. There's so much more to explore.
Exactly. This deep dive has hopefully given you a better understanding of the different perspectives on the origins of the Amazigh people and their language. But keep digging. Keep exploring. That's what the deep dive is all about. Thanks for joining us.